Commissioner Zuber, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Commissioner Acharya?
Yes.
Commissioner Eggenberger is not here. Commissioner Foster?
Good evening.
Commissioner Okan? Not present. Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
Here.
Commissioner Weber?
Here.
Commissioner Zuber here, and Chairman Green.
Here.
All right.
Okay, and of course, we have our staff with us, Community Planner Patrick Sloan and Senior Planner Aaron Schluto. And we also have Attorney Sarah Gibbs with us tonight. And welcome to you all, and welcome to those who ultimately will watch us on tape, on TV. We have a healthy agenda tonight, but before we get to that, we have minutes from September 12th to approve. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
you'll think this is really trivial, but there's a typo under the Creekside Landings, last paragraph of, I don't know what page it is. I guess it would be page 8. Refers to the creek as Flower Creek, should be Fowler Creek.
Okay, all right, let's, we need to go ahead and amend those minutes accordingly. Any comments from the commission on that? Oh, okay, do I hear a motion to approve those minutes as amended?
Motion, Mr. Chair.
Got support by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Watkins. Voice vote, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that done. Let's go on to the agenda. Okay, so any late additions from staff as far as the agenda is concerned?
We had heard from Commissioner Okan that he would not be available this evening to attend, so he notified staff. I'll look through my emails to see if Commissioner Eggenberger had let us know. I'm got my email open to see if I've gotten any communications from her, so I'll let you know if I receive anything. And then also, we have not gotten any communications from the public on any of the agenda items for this evening.
All right, do I have any late additions from the commission? Any thoughts? Hearing none, seeing none? Do I hear a motion to accept tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Got a motion by Commissioner Weber to accept the agenda and support by Commissioner Watkins. Voice vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So, we've already handled the communications. We have a public hearing tonight, right? Okay, hold on a second, let me catch up here. All right. We have our first agenda item of the evening. It's St. Thomas a Becket Catholic Church, where we're considering a special land use for this parcel and also site approval. The property is located on the east side of Lily between Palmer and Cherry Hill. Proposed use is a construction of an accessory building and expansion of the religious institution land use on the parcel. Patrick, could you give us more detail?
Sure, thank you. The church, St. Thomas a Becket, is at the, located near the southeast corner of the intersection of Cherry Hill Road and Lily Road. And specifically, it's on the east side of Lily Road as illustrated there in the aerial map there, right across the street from the Holiday Market and that shopping center. And St. Thomas a Becket is proposing 2 changes to the site. One change is to construct a relatively modest-sized accessory building in the southeast corner of the parking lot for storage. It's in an area where there's a dumpster enclosure nearby, and it's heavily vegetated on the south and the east side, so it's got pretty good screening on those sides. And then the visible sides on the west side and the north side, those will be more brick than the other sides, which we'll see on the plans here in a moment. The other part of the application is in the area of the site that's highlighted there in the aerial photo that's surrounded in yellow. They're proposing to expand the outdoor, in an outdoor landscaped area, the religious institution use on that subject property. And most of the site improvements are landscaping, some patio, sculpture, and some boulder seating. But technically, this would be an expansion of the special land use onto that subject parcel. So the special land use is, religious institutions are a special land use in the zoning district, and so they're subject to special land use approval. The site that currently has the church on it has received use approval for the religious institution. The subject site there highlighted in yellow has not yet been approved for religious institution use. So the purpose of that application is just to consider whether to allow for the religious institution use to expand on that parcel to the south. As I noted at the beginning of the meeting, we had not received any communications from anyone in the public for any of the agenda items. This application is the only public hearing that we have this evening. There was a hearing notice published in the newspaper, and hearing notices were mailed to everybody within 300 feet of the site. So prior to tonight's meeting, we had not received any communications from anyone either who had notice or otherwise. There are a few items in terms of site development items that I'd like to go through. So first, I'm just going to scroll down to the plans and get to a little bit of the substance of what's being proposed. So the accessory building that's proposed to be in that southeast corner of the site, here's a black and white of it. And the west elevation, which will be facing towards Lily Road, it will be predominantly brick with the door facing westward, which is the parking lot, so that vehicles can access to that door. And then on the north side, there'll be a band of brick here on the bottom, and then siding along that. So there'll be some brick there facing the north side, but it's quite far from Cherry Hill Road, so I'm not sure how visible it will be from Cherry Hill Road. And then on the east side and on the south side, the siding will be predominantly vinyl siding. And as I noted, those areas are heavily vegetated, so they are unlikely to be viewed from adjacent properties or from the road right away. Therefore, this building will have less than the 50% minimum masonry for a building, but we recommend approval of the proposed designs for the reasons stated, that the south side and the east side will be screened with vegetation, and that the other sides will have more than 50% brick combined. And then I'll go to the color graphics of the outdoor. As soon as I can get that to scroll in, it's thinking. So while it's thinking, one of the items that I'll mention is the parking. There's proposed to be 4 parking spaces removed, accessing the northern parcel or the northern site from the southern site where the proposed special land use is proposed to expand. And the purpose of removing those 4 spaces is to have a patio and walkway area so that people parking on the north side of the site, pedestrians can access to the south side of the site. And it's kind of an open and welcoming area to go to the south. That will result in the number of parking spaces being reduced from 400 to 396. There are 300 spaces on the site, and according to a previous plan, there's a lease agreement for an additional 100 spaces to the north from the medical offices. So overall, the site and the adjacent sites have a capacity for 396 spaces, or 400 spaces, and it's proposed to be reduced down to 396. We recommend approving a modification to permit the removal of the 4 parking spaces for the land use, subject to the condition that any parking demands over 396 spaces must be accommodated by expanding the parking lot in accordance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. And there are places on the church property where that can be expanded. Well, it sounds like that doesn't want to reopen, so let's close it and open it again. So to modify the parking space requirements, there's a section of the zoning ordinance, one I think by now we're probably all familiar with. It's in section 4.01C6 that allows the planning commission to modify the standards of the zoning ordinance to allow for fewer parking spaces than are required by the ordinance. So the 396 spaces available for the use is quite large, and there's space on the site. If they needed to ever expand the parking lot, then they could. The last item that I want to address in terms of discretionary standards is the landscaping. The landscaping on the south side of the site is proposed to meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance for the frontage landscaping. And there are some buffer landscaping requirements in Article 5 of the zoning ordinance. Section 5.07 of the ordinance allows the planning commission to modify any landscape requirement that it deems fit, provided that there's an alternative or that the site design is sufficient enough for that modification. And basically, there's existing vegetation on the far east side of the site that we recommend being used as that buffer area. Although specifically it's section 5.03 D1 that has protective screening whenever a non-residential use in a residential district abuts land zoned for residential purposes. The land to the south of the subject property is owned by the church, so that's part of their site. And then the easternmost garden will be 120 feet from the residential district to the east, and it will be buffered by vegetation that will remain. So we recommend that the landscaping be approved as proposed. And here's the color graphic that we noted in terms of the outdoor area. So up here at the north, there will be 4 parking spaces proposed for removal, and then a pedestrian area along the garden here in the middle. There's some boulder seating, and then there's a walkway to the far east side where there's another garden as well. The site will be heavily landscaped and will exceed the zoning ordinance standards in many respects. And then finally, the last item we want to note is section 27.03C of the zoning ordinance includes criteria for a special land use and determining whether a special land use should be approved. Based on our analysis, we find that all of the special land use criteria of section 27.03 of the zoning ordinance are met, provided that the standards of the previous approved site plan are maintained and that the site can meet the noise standards of section 7.02A of the zoning ordinance. So with that, staff's recommendation is approval of the site plan amendment on the northern parcel for the accessory building. We recommend approval of the special land use on the southern parcel for the proposed expansion of the religious land use, and also approval of the site plan on both parcels for the sculpture garden, the worship garden with seating and associated structures and landscaping as illustrated on the special land use plans and the site plan for the reasons stated in our analysis. And we recommend this subject to 4 conditions. The first is that per section 4.01C6 of the ordinance, approving a modification from the parking requirement of Article 4 for 396 spaces, 296 of which are on site. We would add there, and we would recommend in the motion that this also include the following language: subject to the condition that any parking demands over 396 spaces must be accommodated by expanding the parking lot in accordance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. The second condition is approving a modification from the 50% brick requirement for the accessory building. The third condition is approving the existing vegetative buffer on the south and east sides of the southern parcel in lieu of the protective screening requirement of section 5.03D1 of the zoning ordinance. And fourth, compliance with all state and county and township requirements. That concludes our staff report, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Is the project representative here? Would you like to come up and say a few words? And with that, this is a public hearing, so we need to open the public hearing.
Move to open the public hearing.
Okay, got a motion to open the public hearing by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Weber. Welcome, sir. Oh, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Scott Goldman. I'm with Scott E. Goldman Associates, landscape architecture firm. My firm produced all the plans and design, and our client is here as well. Father Chris Moss from the church is here. Also, Paul Klein that will be building the gardens is also here. So I want to thank you for taking the time to review the project, and questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, let's go right to the audience. If there's anyone that's not involved with the project, would like to say something, now's the time to do that. Going once, going twice.
Mr. Chairman, I move to close the public hearing.
Okay. We have a motion to close the public hearing by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Singh. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, let's start right down on this end. Commissioner Watkins.
Mr. Chairman, no objections to this project. We'll be
Commissioner
happy to
Egan?
see it coming. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Eggenberger?
I also have no objections. I think the garden looks just lovely. Really did a great job.
Commissioner Zuber?
I have no objections.
Commissioner Weber?
I have no objections, but I just want to ask Patrick real quick. What kind of parking demand are you thinking would trigger them having to expand the parking lot? And the reason I ask is, the only time I really see a huge demand on this parking lot in excess of what's there is Christmas and Easter. And people kind of they'll park across the street at the grocery store or whatever. I guess my point is, I wouldn't want to see the parking lot expanded for a handful of days through the year. We've got enough surface parking in the township.
Yeah, and you won't get any disagreement from staff in terms of the amount of surface parking we have in the township. I think it's just a matter of, if it's something where it's a couple of days a year or a handful of holidays a year, that happens with a lot of religious institutions where maybe during they have some of the excess and adjacent parking spaces are sometimes on the grass, and then when the event's over, that happens. If it was to be a recurring thing where ordinance enforcement was going out there and there were ruts in the vegetation and it wasn't growing back, that would be another thing.
I just wanted to make that clarification, so thank you. I have no objections, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Singh?
No objections.
And Commissioner Foster?
No questions.
Commissioner Acharya?
I'm good, thank you.
To that end, though, about the parking, is that the kind of scenario, because at least there is the parking across Lilly at the shopping center, which on a Sunday or at the usual day that this would occur, is that something that an agreement with the landlord at that shopping center might be in order? They're gonna park over there anyway, probably, but to make it official, is that something that we could request, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's an option. The zoning ordinance specifically mentions religious institutions and shared parking agreements going both ways, where sometimes during those peak times where religious institution needs more parking, there can be adjacent or nearby businesses that can provide that space. And for example, I'll show here on the map, these two medical office buildings to the north, on a previously approved site plan for St. Thomas A. Becket, it calls out these two parcels where there's a shared parking agreement where Sundays, typically the offices are closed, and if that's a peak demand, that's a perfect use of that. It can also work another way where I don't think the shared parking goes the other way, but there are some instances where religious institutions share some of their parking with adjacent businesses when their demand is down, but the adjacent business or operation has a peak demand. So that would probably be the best way to resolve that. If there were higher peak demands, it would just be a matter of maybe some signage or letting people know that this parking is available. And I think there is a walkway that allows for people to walk back and forth easily. And if it were to exceed that capacity, they could discuss something about going across the road, although with no crosswalk, the best available option may be on-site with those medical offices. And even looking at historical aerial photos, when they've had peak demand at the church, it appears that some cars are parked in the medical offices, but there is a lot of excess capacity there.
Because I have seen, I don't go there, so I can't really speak firsthand, but I have seen occasions of driving along, not Lily, but on Cherry Hill, where because of a special event or a special thing going on, the drive going from the parking lot up to Cherry Hill has had parking on both sides. And I'm not sure if that's a concern for the fire department or just what, but I know that there are some occasions where they do get excess parking.
Yeah, I think for the drive, if it was a fire department issue, they would just want to make sure that there's appropriate width there, so that if they had to access it, there's enough width there for an emergency vehicle.
Okay, and not to be a party pooper here, because it seems like everybody else is totally satisfied. I have an issue with the building. If you want to bring that up on the slide. Can you see all four elevations there? Okay, so I have no issue with less than 50% brick in this instance. We've done that before. But I do have an issue with two of the sides not having any brick on them at all. I would love to see the short wall on those two blank sides as opposed to just a blank wall. They didn't have to have, as far as I'm concerned, they could have the short wall all the way around. They didn't have to have full brick on the one side. If that makes a difference in terms of the volume of the brick, then so be it. But I just think that the appearance, even though I know people say, well, how much of it's going to be seen? Well, winter comes, leaves go, visibility increases of everything in Canton. So to say that there's a side that people don't see is really not realistic. I would like to see that as part of the project. I don't know how our resident architect feels about that, but.
I have to say that's a good point. I thought about that when I was looking at them, and I didn't bring it up tonight because I didn't think of it.
I mean, if they wanted to have siding on the was it the west elevation, if they wanted to have siding above the short wall and have that short wall just go on all four sides to make up, for some of the volume of brick, I'd have no problem with that.
I think it would look better, actually.
More consistent.
Well, in that big wall of brick with the garage door in it is not as attractive as it could be, let's just say.
Is that something that's doable, you think?
Yeah, just be material changes. Would it be, what if we planted evergreen trees around those sides?
I'm a big advocate of using landscaping as buffers and screening and so on and so forth, but I just know everything in Canton is visible and we should treat it as such, and there's a quality issue there. I don't think we should be shortchanged. It's not that large a building.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair request.
Yeah, sure. Yep, thank you.
Plus the sides where there is no brick, you can see at the left end of the south elevation and the right end of the east elevation, you can see the edge of the brick, and if we
Right.
just take it all the way around the bottom, like you said, there, you won't see that little edge of the brick sticking out.
So
like
do you
that.
think that's a good design though for the west, to just drop the brick on the top side? and
I
just bring-
do. I think
yeah,
it'll look really nice to just go all the way around.
all the way around
Yeah,
with it.
Yeah.
So I think we can initiate a design change and not hold up the project for that. Just
Yeah, I think one of the proposed conditions in the motion is under number 2 that address the modification from the 50% brick. So it would still be a modification from the 50% brick.
Right.
In that motion, you would just describe the changes.
Okay, all right. Other than that, I like the idea, I like the plan, I like the garden.
Thank you.
It's very interesting, in looking at that design. So with that, I've got no other problems.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one comment about
Sure.
your suggestion of a possible shared parking agreement between the church and the shopping center? The only concern I would have about promoting something like that, I'd be concerned that we are indirectly promoting people, pedestrians crossing
Pedestrian.
the road, and there's no crosswalk.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, that would have to include probably
Yeah.
some special designation on the road, on Lily, showing a
of some kind,
crosswalk
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
I don't know if we can institute that or not.
Well, if there's a shared parking agreement between two parties, that agreement would come before the planning commission. So anyone in the township that wants to do a shared parking agreement, it's under the planning commission's purview. So if that were to ever come up in the future, that would be something the planning commission would have to look at. Otherwise, if it was a recurring issue with them having overflow parking, they do have sufficient space on their site to add space if they needed to. It's just a matter of how often they would do it, if it was just a handful of times per year, or if it was something where, the site's not keeping the vegetation because all the parking, that would be an indicator of needing an on-site lot.
All right, that's all I have. Do I hear a motion being developed, or?
Sure. Patrick, you're going to have to remind me of the addition you had suggested to the item, bullet number 1 there, about the parking requirements. But I move to recommend approval of the special land use on parcel number 089-99-0013-702 for the proposed expansion of the religious land use and approval of the site plan amendment on said parcels for the accessory building, sculpture garden, worship garden with seating, and associated structures and landscaping as illustrated on the special land use plans and site plan for the reasons stated in the above analysis, subject to the following conditions. Per section 401C6, to approve a modification from the parking requirements of Article 4 for 396 parking spaces, 296 of which are on site. Per section 2606, footnote H, to approve a modification from the 50% brick requirement for the accessory building, and as per our discussion at the Planning Commission, to recommend that they do a low, partial height brick wall around the entire structure instead of just on the west and whatever the other wall was that they were showing in north. Per section, and number 3, per section 5.07, to approve the existing vegetative buffer on the south and east sides of parcel number 089-99-0013-702 in lieu of the protective screening requirements of section 501D1 of the zoning ordinance. And number 4, compliance with all state, county, and township requirements. Did I miss something that you had said to add to item number 1?
Yeah, on number 1, we recommend adding the following to the end of it. Subject to the condition that any parking demands over 396 spaces must be accommodated by expanding the parking lot in accordance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance.
I accept that amendment to my motion.
And was that sufficient indication about the brick changes? Just saying that we're okay with the short wall all the way around?
I think so. Just to clarify that the short wall, by short, you mean the height of the wall that's illustrated on
It's
the plans?
illustrated on the 2 sides, yeah.
Right,
Okay,
that's illustrated on the one side.
one side.
No, that would be like a partial height brick wall, a partial height veneer.
Okay.
It's not a knee wall, yeah.
So that motion is sufficient with that verbiage?
Yes.
Support.
All right, we've got hold on, hold your thought. We have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Eggenberger.
I'm sorry to beat a
Yes.
dead horse,
Go ahead.
but with regard to the condition of the parking, and I guess maybe this goes to the township attorney, do we need to put anything in there to clarify how that's going to be enforced if they need to expand the parking lot? I mean, theoretically, the way it's written, if somebody goes out there Christmas Eve and sees 450 cars out there, is somebody from the building department or the enforcement division going to say, they had over 396 cars there, they need to expand their parking lot? I mean, I know that's probably, I know it's very hypothetical, but do we need to polish that somehow?
So, repeat the motion back to me as it relates to that requirement. It was, subject to expansion of the parking lot, if the parking spaces exceeded the demand.
We can't hear you. Can you get a mic? please?
So your motion was subject to the condition that the parking be expanded. Was it on site, Patrick? It be expanded on site if the parking demand exceeded the availability?
Yeah, it states, subject to the condition that any parking demands over 396 spaces must be accommodated by expanding the parking lot in accordance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. So I suppose expanding the parking lot would just be one of many options. It could also be a shared parking agreement for the planning commission.
Yeah, I suppose I would amend that to expand it to provide available parking, either through shared parking agreement or expansion on site, to the extent enforcement becomes an issue as it relates to parking on this site.
I'll accept that friendly amendment.
All right, so we have an amended motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber, and I'm assuming support for that amended? Okay, by Commissioner Eggenberger. Any further discussion on this motion, this amended motion? Hearing none, seeing none. Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote on that, please?
Sure. Commissioner Acharya?
Yes.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
That's a yes. So onward to the trustees.
Thank
Good
you.
luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right, our second item on the agenda tonight is Haggerty 3. We're considering a site plan on this. This property is located south of Haggerty Circle, which is located west of Haggerty Road between Palmer and Michigan Avenue. The proposed use there is 2 buildings for warehousing and material distribution. Patrick, could you give us more detail?
Sure, thank you. The proposed site is located west of Haggerty Road, north of Michigan Avenue, and it's on this road here called Haggerty Circle. And it was originally developed as a corporate park, and the site had a special land use approved several years ago for warehouse and distribution facilities. One of the conditions was that the warehouse and distribution use had to be on the eastern 2/3 of the site, which is where the proposed use is, right around this area here, south of the westernmost building. So there's a previously approved special land use for this site for a warehouse and distribution facility. The applicant proposes 2 spec buildings for warehouse and distribution. They're each 37,147 square feet. 2-story buildings that will include warehousing and office space. The site is zoned light industrial research, and the warehouse and distribution facilities are special land uses, which the use was previously granted in the development of the park. With a use that is approved and where there's no discretionary decisions or there are no special land uses or variances, then many industrial buildings are approved at staff where there's not a review by planning commission or the township board required. So once in a while in the township, there will be an industrial building developed where if they meet all the standards of the zoning ordinance, there's no discretionary decisions, it's a permitted use in the district, that the staff can approve a site plan and it doesn't go to the planning commission or the board. However, in some cases where there are discretionary decisions with an industrial special land use, then the use automatically goes to the planning commission and subsequently the township board. And in the proposed site plan, there are a handful of discretionary decisions that the planning commission have to review. And they're fairly minor, and they're discretionary items that staff recommends approval for. So here's the development on the south side. So there will be one entrance on the south side of Haggerty Circle going into the site. It'll have one shared common access drive with parking in the front of each building. And then a central drive down the middle between the buildings with parking on each side. And then in the rear, there's area for truck loading and unloading, truck turnaround, dumpster enclosure, all in the back of the site away from the surrounding residential areas. The site is designed to comply with the zoning ordinance except for the discretionary items that they're asking for planning commission review of. And those are the following. The first is to approve a modification from the parking requirement. Because they're spec buildings, we don't know what the future parking requirement will be and what the parking demand will be. Based on the floor area and the number of employees estimated during the largest work shift, there are 134 spaces required for warehouse and distribution, but 162 spaces if there's a manufacturing component. There are 132 parking spaces proposed. It's probably sufficient for the site, but because there's two buildings, there'll probably be a shared parking element to it, as well as if there's different shifts or not as much peak demand. Usually what we see in industrial buildings is the parking demand is less than what the ordinance requires. However, the applicants do show some spaces that they consider land banked at on the north side of the parking lot. And they would propose to construct parking in there if there was ever the demand for additional parking spaces. The issue that staff has with those land bank spaces is that they're located in the front yard setback, and they can't be constructed without a future site plan amendment and a variance approval. So although they're shown on the property as potential future parking spaces, they're really not spaces that we'd recommend using unless there was excessive parking demand and there was nowhere else on the site to locate parking spaces. So the first modification is from the parking space requirements of the zoning ordinance. The second modification is that for office portions of industrial buildings, the zoning ordinance requires 75% brick, which is a lot. The applicant proposes on the office portions of those industrial buildings to have 61.67% brick. It's actually a jumbo brick, but from afar, it looks like brick. We have jumbo brick on a lot of large industrial buildings, a lot of large commercial buildings too. And we recommend approval of that percentage of the brick on the office portion because those office portions, the remaining portions will be almost 25% windows and almost 14% full split face blocks. So although the brick is under 75%, there's a lot of glass and split face block that makes it an attractive office entrance. So we recommend approval of that modification. And then finally, the third modification is from the minimum foundation landscape depths on between the two buildings, and there's a drive between the buildings, and then there's parking on each side. And between the parking and the buildings themselves, there's a 7-foot deep area, and there's a walkway both into the building, and then I'll bring it down to the landscape plans just to illustrate what they're proposing there. What they're proposing is a modification from the minimum 10-foot deep landscape foundation along those buildings. So as you see on each side of the building, there is landscaping, there are shrubs, there are trees, there's parking lot landscaping, there's where there's a note here for these areas adjacent to the buildings to be sod. So there is an effort there to have the foundation landscaping. The only exception is that it's 7 feet deep from the building instead of 10 feet. So the Planning Commission has discretion to lower that from 10 feet down to 7. So with that, staff's recommendation is approval of the site plan for Haggerty 3 Warehouse and Material Distribution Center on the subject parcel, subject to the following 4 conditions. The first is a modification from the parking requirement for 132 parking spaces. The second is a modification from the 75% brick requirement for the office portion of the buildings and to approve 61.67% jumbo brick for the office portions. Third is to approve a modification from the minimum foundation landscape depth of 10 feet and to approve a 7-foot wide building foundation landscape depth on the sides that are illustrated on the plan. And fourth, compliance with all state, county, and township requirements. That concludes the staff report, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. All right, we're going to start with this end of the commission. Commissioner Acharya,
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Foster,
I don't have any questions either.
Commissioner Singh,
No questions so far.
Commissioner Weber,
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Zuber,
I'm good.
Commissioner Eggenberger,
No questions.
Watkins,
No objections to the development, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Green.
What do you think?
I concur with my fellow commissioners. No problems with this project whatsoever. With that said, do I hear any semblance of a motion?
I move to recommend approval of the site plan for the Haggerty 3 Warehousing and Materials Distribution Center uses on parcel number 104-99-0013-702, subject to the following conditions. Per section 401C6, to approve a modification from the parking requirements of Article 4 for 132 parking spaces. Per section 2606, footnote H, to approve a modification from the 75% brick requirement for the office portions of the industrial buildings, and to approve 61.67% jumbo brick for the office portions of the buildings. I've never heard it called jumbo brick before, so thank you. I had to look that up in the packet. It's a concrete block. Per specification 5.07, to approve a modification from the minimum foundation landscape depth of 10 foot required in section 5.03A4, and to approve a 7-foot wide building foundation landscape depth on the sides of the buildings as stated on the plans, in compliance with all state, county, and township requirements.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Singh. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, seeing none. Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote, please?
Sure. Commissioner Acharya?
Yes.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
That's a yes. This moves on to the trustees, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so our third agenda item for the evening is Citizens Bank, where we're considering a site plan for property located at the southwest corner of Ford Road and Haggerty. The proposed changes include facade and architectural changes. Patrick, is there more going on here?
Yes, thank you. Citizens Bank is proposing some facade renovations. Their exterior renovations are relatively minor, but because of the significance of their facade changes, we wanted the Planning Commission to look at the facade and then make a decision on that rather than having staff decide on the facade based on the significance of the changes. There are some minor exterior changes. They're replacing the ATM, but that was something that was an administrative type of review because of the location. It's going to be in the same location, just a different machine, so there's no substantial change there. The major change that is taking place on the site that is significant is that there's going to be a cross-access proposed. I'll turn this so that north is up. So here's the Citizens Bank there, and right now there's an access going in from Haggerty, and the applicants are proposing to connect a cross-access to the west to Wendy's. You may recall back in, I think it was December of last year, it was almost a year ago, where Wendy's was doing a renovation, and as a condition, they are required to record a reciprocal cross-access easement both on the west and the east sides. So at this point, there's an opportunity here to make a connection, and this is something that's noted in the MDOT Ford Road Plan from many years ago in terms of a cross-connection that's a priority in the district. So we think this is a great time, a great opportunity to have this cross-connection, especially with the pending project coming up for the Ford Road Boulevard and having access through sites. So that connection is probably the most significant change to take place on the site. The other change is the architecture, where the major changes include placing fiber cement paneling over some of the existing brick areas, also constructing an entry portal on the west side of the building entrance that's mostly fiber cement paneling. They'll install some wall panels over some of the existing brick areas on the east side, and also installing an awning over the windows on the west side of the building. The building materials will still comply with Section 26.06 of the zoning ordinance, and the building will continue to have at least 50% face brick on the sides. The overall building percentage of brick will be at 57%. For the parking is not proposed to change. The landscaping and screening, the landscaping has a previously approved landscape plan from 2001. It's not proposed to change, so this is something where we're going to look at the previous landscape plan, and before we do final approvals, our landscape inspector will look at it to make sure that it's compliant with that 2001 plan. And then the last item we have is there are some signage changes, but the signage is under the purview of the building division. So there may be some signage in the plan that changes once the building division looks at it. So there may be some changes there. It's just noted here as a requirement of the zoning ordinance and a condition that their signage meet the standards of the ordinance. So with that, our recommendation is approval of the bank's site plan amendment on the subject parcel, subject to the following conditions being fulfilled by the applicant. First, recording a reciprocal cross-access easement to the adjoining site to the west pursuant to Section 6.10 E3D of the zoning ordinance. Second is compliance with the signage requirements pursuant to Article 6A of the zoning ordinance. And third is compliance with all state, county, and township requirements. That concludes our report, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Is the project representative here?
I don't believe they are. I think they had some folks that were out of town that were working on some of the designs, so I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to make it this evening.
Okay, all right, we will proceed without them then. I know in the past, there's been, some commissions have said if the project sponsor can't be here, then we don't need to proceed, but I think we can go ahead with this. Let's start with this end. Commissioner Watkins?
No objection, just one question. Patrick, on the fiber cement siding, is that like a faux wood for that siding, or, and I'm speaking specifically to the entrance on, what do I want to say, on Ford, which I thought I saw that the door is still there. Does the fiber cement siding have a wood resemblance, or is it, because I can't gather what it is from the rendering at all.
Sometimes it depends on the pattern of it. Sometimes they can put a pattern that almost looks like a wood, almost like a hardy plank siding if they pattern it. Sometimes the pattern is meant to look like stone.
Actually, Nichiha, which is, generally it looks like wood. I mean,
word you use?
the brand name is Nichiha, N-I-C-H. It's on the drawings, but
That's a new one on me?
Oh, it looks a lot like wood.
Got it.
It's it's a nicer fiber cement product
Okay.
than some.
Other than that, no objections, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I know Pete can probably tell us more about it.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yeah.
I also have no objections as long as the people that know what they're talking about with this think it looks okay.
Commissioner Zuber, or did you?
Crap, that's me, isn't it? I think it's fine. Yeah.
The only issue I have is not necessarily an issue. The rooftop unit is obviously exposed. Is there any, I didn't see any indication for covering or material surrounds?
You're on the wrong page. You're on the.
They have,
Oh, I stand corrected. Okay, so architectural louvers.
no, that's usually a top thing we pick because they do have exposed units. A lot of those older buildings do, so we try to catch them.
Okay,
And
I was just a little bit concerned with that. Never mind. Commissioner Weber?
No objections.
Commissioner Singh?
No objection, but I do want to say I'm pretty happy for that cross connection. I had to park in that Wendy's few times myself, so that's a good one.
Cross connections are good in Canton.
Yes.
And yes. Commissioner Foster?
Commissioner Singh took the words out of my mouth. I'm very happy about the cross-access easement. I have a brand-new driver who loves to go to that Dunkin' Donuts, and we live at Fort and Haggerty, so that makes me happy.
Safe.
Commissioner Acharya?
I just, no questions, but I just have one small question for Patrick. We're talking about the Teller canopy, which is about 50 feet from the right-of-way of Haggerty. And there's mention that there could be a proposal to reduce the setback, and then it could come to the Planning Commission without the need for a variance application. So, has that happened in the past where?
So this is something that we will see perhaps quite a bit over the next few years, is that once MDOT has its final designs for Ford Road, that will in some areas result in a widened right-of-way for lanes or their turning loons, like their turnaround areas, they call them loons, or sidewalks. And according to the public website for MDOT, it appears as though on this site, the parking, signage, and landscaping may be impacted. Until MDOT has the final designs and they've engineered everything and laid it out, we won't know for sure. But when we see something like that, we like to at least call it out so that the applicant knows and the Planning Commission knows. And we can kind of anticipate that from a staff standpoint in terms of what may be coming ahead. Last year, MDOT had requested that the Township Board adopt a resolution. MDOT had called it a blanket type of variance, which is not really the right phrasing for it. But before MDOT was going out to do final designs and perhaps talk to adjacent property owners about rights-of-way, they had sought a resolution from the board basically saying that if there's any changes to a site as a result of the road, that there wouldn't be any kind of, I think, any kind of illegal nonconformity or something that if a site was brought out of compliance, that they would not be afoul of the zoning ordinance. And so the Township Board on October 5th, 2021, the Board of Trustees adopted a resolution granting approval of any reduction in the number of spaces because of the MDOT Boulevard project. So for example, if the right-of-way along Ford Road there was to be widened, and if these spaces along Ford Road were to be lost, that would not result in a zoning violation for Citizens Bank where they would be required to construct 7 or 8 more spaces or whatever they may lose. Basically, if they lose spaces as a result of the project, that reduction would be acknowledged as a conforming item, and they wouldn't be required to build the spaces unless they wanted to build them and could put them in a conforming area. So it's just a way of not having businesses go into nonconformity because of a loss of parking or landscaping or similar elements of that as a result of MDOT's project. So that's something that if we see it on a site plan that comes to the Planning Commission now, we kind of call it out and let you know. And in the coming years, we'll bring that up more, or at least until the project starts, where we'll call these things out. Otherwise, when they get into the project, if they start having changes like that, there'll be a mix of them, some of which may come to the Planning Commission, some of which may be staff review, but we'll start to see a lot of projects where there's revisions as a result of the MDOT project.
Sounds good.
Good for you. One last thing from me, and that is, and I don't know that this is a concern yet, or just thinking about this, but traffic flow. By opening up the cross-access, which I agree with, we're also opening up Haggerty to the customers from Duncan, okay? Because obviously you wouldn't want to go out onto Ford Road and have to either do a right turn or a left turn onto Haggerty when you can go through the Citizens parking lot and get out on Haggerty that way. Do you think any additional signage might be needed for that?
There may, in terms of if there is someone coming off of Haggerty, We'll talk to the applicant about having some do not enter signage here because they have both the ATM lane on the north side and then a bypass lane on the south side. So we'll work with the applicant to put signage up there. It's in their interest as much as anyone's to have signage there. Both either do not enter and/or directional signage instructing drivers coming from Hagerty to turn. And that should be there whether that cross access is there or not. And then businesses, they can coordinate with each other on cross-access signage. So Wendy's may benefit from having some directional signage on the Citizen site and vice versa so that people know which way to go. The ordinance, the sign part of the ordinance does provide for directional signage on sites.
Okay, because my concern is not so much with prohibition of the turning. I'm just thinking of just, controlling the flow, because if I'm living south on, the Hagerty, I'm coming up north on Hagerty, and I want to get a coffee before I get on 275 to go to work. God, it'd be nice and convenient for me to cut in the Citizens parking lot, cut all the way over and get into the drive-through at Dunkin', or even walk in for that matter. But then when I leave, I'm going to leave out on Ford Road and head to the right, and nice little jog, and I'm on my way to work. So do we want to prohibit use as much as control it? I guess that would be my question to, anybody have any thoughts on that? Because it's going to happen. It's there. That's going to be an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it'll just depend on what the access is at that point and where they're going. So we have the Wendy's site to the west. Wendy's has agreed to their west to have a cross connection to Dunkin'. On the Dunkin' east side, we don't yet have that cross connection. We're still trying to work on it. But if it's someone from Hagerty, if they wanted to go to Dunkin', they would have to go through Citizens, go through Wendy's, and then the Dunkin' access, if it goes in, is likely on the northwest part of the Wendy's site, which would be a pretty far jog for someone coming off of Hagerty. And there may be a boulevard there that may not allow direct access for a left onto Hagerty, depending on MDOT's final designs. So that may take them longer to negotiate those internal cross-access than it would be for them just to make the Michigan left onto Ford and then go right into Dunkin'. I think it'll just be a matter of timing in terms of, how quickly they get to that drive-through with either way.
It was just a
People will
thought
experiment.
that I had. We always encourage the cross-accesses and staying off of Ford Road and all that kind of good stuff. So, this would be one of those that, may or may not cause a problem. So with that said, any further discussion on this project? Or do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the site plan for Citizens Bank on tax parcel number 71-053-99-0001-001, subject to the following conditions being fulfilled by the applicant. Number one, recording a reciprocal cross-access easement to the adjoining site to the west pursuant to Article 6.10E3D of the zoning ordinance. Number two, compliance with the signage requirements pursuant to Article 6A of the zoning ordinance. And number three, compliance with all state, county, and township requirements.
Support.
All right, we have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Eggenberger. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, hearing none. Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote, please?
Sure, Commissioner Acharya?
Yes.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yes.
Word that, sorry.
That's quite all right.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
And that's a yes from me as well. So that's on to the trustees, correct?
That one is just a site plan change through Planning Commission because it's a minor modification. It was referred from staff to the Planning Commission.
Gotcha. Okay, so back to the Planning Commission and onward. Okay, so our fourth agenda item is Mann's Lumber. We're considering a site plan amendment on this. This property is located on the south side of Michigan Avenue between Beck Road and Belleville. The proposal consists of changes to the site plan amendment, which we approved March 7th of this year, for an addition to the existing structure and expansion of the lumberyard operations. So Patrick, could you give us more detail?
Thank you. Back at the March 7th meeting this year, the Planning Commission approved some site plan amendments to the Mann's Lumber site, which included a building addition to the rear of the building on the south, construction of an accessory storage building, and addition of parking spaces, fuel tanks, and access management improvements on the site. From the time that that plan was approved, the applicants are proposing the following 3 site changes to the site. The first is the applicants propose to remove curbing on the west side of the site. Specifically, it's this western fire lane on the west side of the building. The far west side here was approved at the March 7th meeting with curbing, but as you can see, there's kind of a curbing line detail here, and then on the west side of the fire lane, it stops. And on this whole west side of the lane, they propose not having the curbing there. We've talked to the engineering division, and they have no objections to removing the curbing on the west side of the fire lane because the water will flow eastward, so it's not expected to have any changes in stormwater flow or runoff. We talked to the fire department about that. They don't necessarily require curbing on the fire lane, so as long as it meets the dimension and construction standards of a fire lane, they have no objection to removing the curbing on that west side of the site. The second change that's proposed is to reduce the number of light poles that are on the site, but to increase the height of some of the remaining light poles. The zoning ordinance states that light fixtures shall not exceed the height of 25 feet or the height of the building, whichever is less. And the principal building measures 23 feet 8 inches. So the previous poles were at 25 feet that were approved on March 7th. However, section 2.13D of the zoning ordinance allows the Planning Commission to modify the height standards in industrial districts based on the position and height of lights, the character of the use, and character of surrounding areas, provided the height of the fixture does not exceed a maximum height of the district. In this case, the district max height is 45 feet. The proposed light fixtures are proposed to go from 25 feet proposed up to 35 feet. The proposed 35 feet high light fixtures are located in the material storage area that's east of the approved bulk shed building, but not near the eastern lot line. And the purpose for that was to reduce the number of light poles and to increase the amount of coverage of the light with higher poles and fewer poles. So that's a change that if the Planning Commission approves of the increased height of the fixtures, then staff can work with the applicant to ensure that all lighting is directed downward and shielded. According to the photometric plan, the lighting meets the illumination levels in terms of the maximum illumination at the lot lines. So the photometric plan shows that that can be done in terms of lighting the site without having the light trespass to violate the ordinance. The third change that's proposed is to install an 8-foot-high decorative fence along the east side of the site from the north side of the proposed bulk shed to the southeast corner, instead of an 8-foot-high fence or wall required by the Planning Commission on March 7th. At the March 7th meeting, the Planning Commission had adopted in its motion of approval a condition that the fence on the east side of the site be a solid fence and that it be 8 feet in height. The applicants had subsequently proposed to put in a wall that was a masonry type of wall that was 8 feet in height along the east side. The plans before you this evening, the applicants are asking the Planning Commission for a modification that instead of having an 8-foot-high solid fence or an 8-foot-high solid wall, the applicants request an 8-foot-high decorative fence along the east side of the site from the north side of the bulk shed to the southeast corner. So staff's recommendation on the proposals is that while we recommend approval of the site plan amendment to omit the curbing on the west side of the fire lane and modify the height of the light poles according to the submitted plans, staff does not recommend modifying the screening on the east side of the site. That was required by the Planning Commission at its meeting on March 7th. Although that modification is under the purview of the Planning Commission, so we'll defer to the Planning Commission on that. That concludes our staff report, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Is the project sponsor here? Come on up. Welcome.
Pete Mans Lumber. Thanks for having us. Thanks for the review, Patrick. Recommendations. I guess, and I don't know how to say it, but a little bit of correction. What we're asking is to leave the existing fence on the east property line as is and actually not modify anything. I think we had a typo, Patrick, in the plan where we wrote down 8 feet. But the current fence right now is a 6-foot decorative aluminum fence. And what we're asking you guys to consider is to honor the site plan commission's approval back in 2004. So, you know, as you can see, all of our modification on the site is, well, you can't really see. Do you want to go to the aerial picture? Do you mind? We're paving the south lot right there where his hand is, right? And then we're putting a 30,000 square foot addition on the west building, on the south line. There's no modification to the site along the east property line, up along Michigan Avenue, along the frontage of the retail building. So we're really not touching that area at all. And if we could not modify that fence, it would save us quite a bit of money. We kind of reviewed the 2004 minutes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It was approved back then. Most of the justification or reasoning behind it was, you know, currently our outdoor storage is about 500 feet back from Michigan Avenue. So the sight lines are fairly well protected to begin with. Our entire retail site from Michigan Avenue pretty much covers the entire yard. You really can't see it. It's industrial zoning on the east there. It's not up against a residential zoning or whatnot. The quadrants, Research Drive, is under process of being developed, will continue to be developed, further limiting the sight lines of this outdoor storage area. And like Patrick said, I think back in '04, it was originally, you know, the book said a 6-foot masonry fence, and the commission granted a 6-foot decorative aluminum. And if we could keep that as is, that'd be nice.
Is the 6-foot aluminum fence is there now?
There now.
Okay, what does it look like?
It's like a picketed.
Is it what's on the sheet? Is it on the sheet C7.0 at the top? Is that what it is?
I could also give my name, Alan Scott, Rand Construction. I can give a little more detail.
Okay.
Yeah, the fence that's there today is 6 foot and decorative like that.
Like that.
8-foot detail that we mistakenly put on there, Patrick. I didn't catch it. Tim did that, sorry. But that's what it looks like. And if I could please just give you a visual aid, not as modern and awesome as Patrick has access to, but my old caveman technique.
Did you fax yourself something?
Yeah, he did.
Oh.
This bottom red line here, again, is the east side, toward the research. Today, this red line represents the fence that's there. And you can see from the aerial that Patrick had up there a moment ago, there was kind of a little forest of trees back here. So in '04, when this was built, Sean checked, dove around the trees for that. So really, all Mans needs to do to complete this entire project is to put in about 55 feet of fence back here, extend what they have today. I'm the general contractor. If we put in the fence that we talked about last time, just bury his soul. It's It's $100,000. The use hasn't changed on either side of the fence. The zoning hasn't changed on either side of the fence. The ownership hasn't changed on either side of the fence. And I also have some photographs that I didn't get to Patrick, that I could give him a flash drive right now to show you folks. You can't see. The 2004 approval, which was backed by Mr. Green, actually seconded. He was doing all the seconding, not the second.
He's moved up in the world.
Yeah.
Yes, several chairs for the center. The primary concern was sightlines for Michigan Ave. And the photos I have, which I could give to Patrick if he has a flash drive in his computer, you can't see it. You can't see past this building firstly, and also with the write-up says that you guys have, there's a piece of concrete wall here, maybe full-on masonry here, and here, and gates. Okay, so firstly, you can't see past the building, so then, I only did this today, I had one of my guys go out and drive Michigan Avenue safely, pull over, and take pictures, but with all the, natural matter that is there and developed and grown since 2004, you just can't see it. And I also had them drive down here, and as you folks know, because you approved it, I think it's Loomis, right, building up there. So there's one lot left with nothing on it, and you're here, you're like, you can look through what will be a building layer over 1,000 feet, then you can see it. But if you just maneuver in cars and whatnot, extending 55 feet of fence instead of spending $100,000.
1,000-foot of fence.
It's 1,000
So,
feet of fence.
so let me ask you this. So the fence that we're talking about, that's there right now, is only 6 feet tall,
6 foot.
and it is, you see right through it, right? Because it's got slats and everything else. So all of your storage and everything that's in that yard, no matter where you're at along that line, you're going to be able to see what's there, correct?
Patrick, do you have, I'll answer your
I-
question first. Do you have a USB in your laptop?
I can't put a USB in my laptop. Our IT division doesn't allow outside USBs to use.
That's smart advice, by the way. I was thinking about that.
I thought it too.
We have a Google Street View. This is from
Yeah.
Research Drive.
Well, that's without Loomis.
Yeah, and so Loomis, they won't, or anyone who goes on there, they won't occupy the entire frontage. Part will be building, part will be parking lot that you'll see through. But it's a Google Street View of that vacant area where you see the man's storefront, and then as you go southward, you can barely see the fence, but it's a transparent fence, so it's decorative, but really not to the benefit of, what it.
Doesn't do any screening, in other words. So my contention is this, and since you brought it up, yes, I was a newbie in 2004, but something else was different in 2004 on Michigan Avenue. Michigan Avenue back then, on that side of Michigan Avenue, in fact, most of Michigan Avenue, it was all on the master plan, light industrial. It is mixed use now, which means we can have businesses come in, we can have a lot of different activities going on Michigan Avenue that we couldn't have had back in 2004. And the purpose of having an 8-foot-high solid fence is so that we don't see what you've got in your yard there. Quite honestly, it's not the prettiest view, and I think you'll admit that. Maybe.
I'll agree with you.
And
Since I do only have old caveman tools, because I'm getting older myself, I did have a photograph of what you folks have also approved, the Tractor Supply Company. Now, Tractor Supply is about 50 feet off Michigan Ave and has a 4-foot block fence and then a 4-foot decorative, the same exact thing we're talking about, on top of it. But it's a retail facility, so of course, they want you to see when you pull up, oh, good, they have my horse trough out there. Oh, good, they have that piece of fence. I guess, because you can see everything they've got there yet, because it's 50 feet off the road. He's got a sales facility 500 feet off the road, and then his lumber is further behind that, you can't see it. So
from Michigan Avenue, correct, granted.
That's right, and that's
From
what
Michigan
we're
Avenue.
talking about, Michigan
No, we're talking about the view from pretty much all angles now because things have changed. you know, it's not enough
We're talking
just,
about Research Drive, too.
exactly.
I am too, but it doesn't look like that even right now, so there's buildings there. And again, the language in '04 spoke about when more buildings are developed, I've got it, you probably got it in your records, I have it with me. It says that when more buildings are, and so these buildings have finally, 20-some years later, have finally gone up. It's just, who is seeing that stuff? And it's not.
I understand, I get your point, I get your point. However, it's not always a question of who's seeing, it's a matter of who can see it. And whether it's a regular thing or not, this helps Canton to shield what's in your yard. I'm just going to be honest with you. That is not the prettiest sight to behold, and to me, being a Cantonian, I don't want to see that.
Cantonian or Cantonite?
I think
You know,
Cantonite
I
sounds
just-
cryptic.
It does.
yeah.
Just want to point out that we record these, and when you're talking
Yes.
in the middle of
Yeah,
the
we
room, the
need you to-
folks at home aren't going to know what you're saying, so.
Your words of wisdom, yes.
Okay, well, anyway, those are our points that are somewhat diminished by not having some.
I'll make this concession for myself, because when I was looking at the packet, I'm going, okay, so we approved back in March, it was a masonry fence, right? It was a masonry wall?
Opaque.
Okay, and I'm okay with not being masonry, but being one of the 8-foot-high, solid, no-view, decorative fences that are on the market today. I'm okay with that, but I'm not okay with a fence that's designed so you can see through it for your yard.
Asking or suggesting that had we not be touching this site, this fence would be 100% compliant.
We are
Yeah.
touching it, so.
Asking for the consideration. And if I was modifying that east line, then it would be totally understanding I gotta remove the fence or edit it. But since we're not even touching it, I was asking for the consideration to leave it as is, as it's compliant today, and not incur the extra $100,000.
Anybody else care to weigh in on the commission?
Through the chair,
Yes.
super quickly, so you have the benefit of having someone who goes to visit Pride Athletics. Pride is at the very tip end of Research Drive. Patrick, if you scroll down there, yeah. So as I pull into Research, go to work out, I pull into the parking lot to the farthest to the south, right there, and you can look over. I can see the development. I can see the construction. I think the point I'm making is that I see it. I'm well aware of the existing fence. It is not a screening fence of sorts. Knowing that development is coming to the parcel to the west, I'm right in saying so, right, Patrick? I think we'll have development right at the west parcel to the subject site, headed to the north?
Yes,
Absolutely.
there's a plan approved. for,
Absolutely, I think I remember that. What I'd like to see, and I'm one of 8 or 9, excuse me, I'd like to see something that's not what's existing there. So I think I matched the comments of the commission chair, saying that something should be there that's going to screen what we're seeing, not only right there at Research to the south, but just looking due west. Thanks so much, Mr. Chair.
Want to weigh in on this?
Well, I found my minutes, and I wasn't at this meeting, which is why I was sitting here going, I don't remember any of this. I don't know.
Probably in Switzerland.
No, but I'm jet lagged right now because I just was. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not going there to see it, but I kind of understand what you're saying. It's there. It's been okay. I feel like we're being a little ridiculous by insisting that they have to put in a brand-new fence. I mean, it's not their fault that other things are being built in around it. They've got this place. It's been legal, and I don't know, feels a little ridiculous to have to insist they put in this really big, high fence. But I wasn't there for all the conversation, so You know, if there's things that you guys had said
But you're
during
here
that
now.
that I'm missing,
But you're here now, and you
I am.
understand the site.
Yeah.
And you understand what's ahead, and et cetera, et
I
cetera.
think so, yeah.
You think it's okay?
I do.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
I kind of agree with Nancy, because if they were not modifying, that was perfectly fine. So it's kind of quite a burden on them to spend that kind of money for this. So I agree with Nancy on that one.
I do too. I go there quite often to buy stuff. I'm a contractor myself. It's not a junkyard, that it is not a very pretty, I mean, it's a lumber yard. It's not that people are looking at junk. It's just a lumber yard, yeah. Yeah, so I think it's okay. I don't even remember seeing that fence whenever I go pull back and get stuff from those warehouses, and keep it nice and visually well, so.
I don't have a problem with keeping it the way it is. I mean, like everyone else has said, I agree that it's been there for a while, and it seems like a pretty big penalty to impose.
All right, with that said, are there any other issues on this proposal that we need to discuss for entertaining any kind of a motion? Nothing? Okay, do I hear a motion?
I move to, I'm just going to read it and modify it on the fly here. I move to partially approve the site plan amendment for Man's Lumber at 47255 Michigan Ave, parcel number 131-99-0008-003, to omit the curbing on the west side of the fire lane and to modify the height of the light poles according to the submitted plans. I guess I'm just going to say I move to approve leaving the fence. I'm not sure how to word that. Like, we don't need to address the fence? What do we want to do with that?
I think it would be maintaining the previously approved fence from 2004.
Okay.
And the request from the applicant is to extend the fence farther south according to the proposed plans.
Okay. What Patrick said. That's the rest of my,
Oh, I support that.
did you have something to add?
So is it my understanding that the fence is going to be added onto? Was that part of the initial, like, I don't have the initial site plan, I don't know what the initial.
Yeah, it's
I
where the
looked at it
trees are in the
briefly, but-
southeast corner. We need to fill that in.
Okay.
So
Okay.
where, well, I'm going to have to turn this here. So where we are is, this is the southeast corner, so south here, we're in Van Buren Township, and so what they've labeled here is connect to existing fence at this point, and then they have this letter K, they're pulling that fence southward to the corner.
So I guess what I would do is instead of approving the modification to the fence as part of the site plan, I would simply recognize the previous nonconformity. So you're not in a position where you're approving a continuing nonconformity.
Okay.
And so later on, they come back and say, well, in 2022, you approved this fence, and so now we have an even larger nonconformity. You see what I'm saying? So you're just recognizing the 2004 nonconformity, and you're not requiring them to replace the entire fence as they would otherwise be required to do under the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
You're waiving that requirement and allowing them to continue the 2004 nonconformity.
So, okay.
That's just an add-on to the motion, then.
Yeah, so I guess I would amend my motion to say I move to partially approve the site plan amendment for Man's Lumber at the said location to omit the curbing and modify the height of the light poles, and we acknowledge that the existing fence that's along the property line is non-conforming.
And that they may extend that small portion without losing their nonconformity.
Okay,
Southern property line.
yeah, to the southern property line. Okay.
Support. Support.
All right, we have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Zuber and support by Commissioner Eggenberger. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, hearing none. Commissioner Zuber, would you call the vote, please?
Sure, Commissioner Acharya?
Yes.
Commissioner Eggenberger?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Singh?
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins?
I'm a no.
No? Okay. Commissioner Weber?
Yes.
Commissioner Zuber, yes, and Chairman Green.
No,
All right,
but the motion does pass.
it does.
Thank you all very much for your consideration tonight, and Patrick, thank you for your help.
Thank you.
All right, good luck to you. Okay, our fifth agenda item of the evening is a discussion, right?
Yes. I think so.
Okay, so we got miscellaneous discussion. We're going to discuss amendments to Appendix A, zoning of the Code of Ordinances. I don't know who wants to handle that. Would that be you, Aaron? You want to handle that? Okay.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So this ordinance amendment discussion comes to you this evening. At the September 13th, 2022 meeting, the Charter Township of Canton Board of Trustees initiated an amendment to the zoning ordinance to amend the site plan review procedures in accordance with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation Redevelopment Ready Communities Standards. So the RRC certification is something that Board of Trustees has been actively pursuing. Planning staff has been working on addressing any of the needed improvements in order to achieve certification. A couple of the big ones that need to be done is the master plan, zoning ordinance rewrites, but in addition to that, a lot of these smaller components we can do in the meantime. And one of them is to look at the site plan review process to make sure it's as streamlined, transparent, easy for applicants, cost-effective where possible. So that is brought to you this evening. So Canton Township Zoning Ordinance Section 27.02 outlines the regulations, and I've included those in the memo. So there are 5 instances in which site plan review is required. And these are somewhat vague, so we wanted to take a look at these in a little bit more depth. Based on the standards, most new construction and redevelopment projects require site plan review, in which complete site plans are reviewed by the Planning Commission, who then make a recommendation to the Township Board for final approval. There are some exceptions to this process, which include Planning Commission approval of uses in the office zoning district and staff approval of permitted uses in the industrial districts if there are no variances or discretionary decisions. As it's currently written, the site plan review process does not align with RRC best practices. And this can often cause delays for development projects and applicants. So we've prepared a table, which we've included in your meeting packet, to showcase how projects may be reviewed and approved as part of a zoning ordinance amendment. So this evening, we would like to discuss some of these with you so that way we can bring back some formal draft text language to you next month. But before we started to do that, we wanted to get your feedback on a couple of these items that we would be looking to amend. So as part of this, we're summarizing the changes that we're looking to incorporate. So one of the major changes would be Planning Commission would have the authority to approve with conditions, or deny site plans for projects that do not require a public hearing. Currently, as I said, the Township Board has the final authority, and the Planning Commission is the recommending body. But with these, with aligning with the RRC best practices, the Planning Commission becomes the authoritative approving body of site plan projects. Planning Commission would review projects for new construction and additions of more than 10% of the existing building footprint, updates to landscaping, lighting plans which don't comply with the zoning ordinance, major changes to building facades, and projects that require discretionary decisions. That's not much different than how things currently are. We're just codifying a little bit more concisely. One of the other items would be administrative reviews for projects in Cherry Hill Village. Though we would need to specify additional details regarding these project scope and whether administrative review would only apply to certain areas of Cherry Hill Village. Now, every project that goes forward in Cherry Hill Village is required to be a planned development district. So regardless of the site plan approval process, the Planning Commission and Township Board would still have review and approval authority of the PDD. The applicant just wouldn't then have to come back with a site plan after they've already gone through the PDD process. So planning division staff would be able to look at the site plan, make sure it complies with the PDD as approved, but they don't have to come back to the Planning Commission and the Township Board for 2 additional review process. Another item is administrative reviews for updates to location or screening of dumpster enclosures, updates to lighting plan. So these are things that are minor changes, minor updates, but as long as they comply with the zoning ordinance, then planning staff could review those types of minor modifications, minor updates, without having to come to the Planning Commission and thereby going to the Township Board as well. Administrative review for additions less than 10% of the existing building footprint or deemed to be minor by the planning official. This would just give a little bit of flexibility in streamlining the process to allow for applicants to move forward with minor improvements to their buildings. Now, some projects may be considered minor in scale and scope and would not require site plan review, such as exterior alterations, including new windows or material replacement, provided those materials comply with the zoning ordinance. Now, interior remodeling and repaving parking areas with no site changes could all be done by administrative staff, provided that everything complies with the zoning ordinance as it's written. So these proposed amendments are intended to comply with RRC best practices and would provide a much more simple, efficient review process for the applicants, a timelier timeline for them to get their projects from conceptual idea to breaking ground and starting construction. And in all instances with these, depending on the scale and scope, if the planning official determines that there are things that really should come before the Planning Commission, Planning Division staff always has that option of bringing something to you that we feel needs to be reviewed in more depth rather than just administrative approval process. So as I mentioned, this is a discussion for these types of ideas that we would like to move forward with. If you provide us any feedback, we can incorporate those ideas and bring back some formal language to you at the next Planning Commission meeting. As I mentioned, the table is there just to give things a little bit more, just an easier way to review what would be required by site plan review, what would be administrative, and what would be an exempt project that does not need to come before the board. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes.
First question is historic significance. As you saw tonight, someone who did their homework and through 2004 at us that the Planning Commission had approved, and of which I was a part of at that time, they were able to use that, in their argument. I don't agree with the connection between that and today, because, 18 years later, whatever. But if administration approves something, does it carry the same weight in a situation like that legally? I guess that'd be my question. It's a lot of burden on the part of staff to, have to own up to that. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
If it's something like that where it's a discretionary decision, that would be to the Planning Commission. So almost like the Haggerty 3 site plan, if they could have complied with every site plan requirement, then it would have been administratively approved. But they wanted narrower landscaping, they wanted some modifications to the architecture. So that was a very clear line for us where we said, okay, well, you can ask for the modifications, but that means it's not a staff review. It's no longer under staff purview, and it's now through the Planning Commission and the board. In the case of that applicant, it was worth it based on having those changes. So for us, I think it adds a little bit of clarity to say, okay, well, if you comply with the ordinance, there's no discretionary decision, then it's very easy. But if it's a discretionary decision, or if we just want to defer it to let the Planning Commission weigh in on it, we can always do that. But certainly if there's a discretionary decision, it goes right to the Planning Commission.
Okay, so just using tonight as examples, St. Thomas Becket, if, under those guidelines, let's say that they complied with the 50% brick, would that even need to come before us then?
If it met the threshold of being over a certain area for a building or something that was significant.
Well, I mean, I'll just take that project as tonight. Would that, should that have even come to us? Because it wasn't that large a project.
But it was expanding a special land use.
Well, that's true. The special land use was, okay, all right. That's a bad example then. But let's say it was just for that outbuilding. That wouldn't need to come before us then, because you want to expedite that and just move it. And if they comply with the 50% brick.
Yeah, if it was something where it was an accessory building, it was under a certain square footage or percentage, you know, if it was a 30 by 40 building, that's something, it'd be very noticeable you'd want to see. For something smaller, we'd want to have a written threshold in the ordinance that would tell us if it's under a certain square footage, it's very clear. And if it's a gray area, those are ones where we would typically want to clarify and decide during the ordinance writing process, you know, what the square footage threshold is.
I just want to clarify, you know, in terms of involvement. For example, on Getty's Road is the Regency, that development there. They just added, or it's under construction right now, a big canopy that didn't come before us. So I'm assuming that it got its approval from administration on that. And looking at it, naturally, I have ideas, not to say that everything that I think of is great and golden, but you don't get any input from the commission when that happens. I'm just wondering if there's a way in which we can even play a bigger role, even in some of those smaller cases.
Well, for the Regency one, that one's got a very long history, and it was built a number of years ago, and that the canopy in the front, that was actually on the original approved plans. It took some searching, but it was there. And because originally the applicant wanted not to do the awning, and so we investigated the plans, they even had a plan development agreement. And that plan development agreement actually called for that awning, that canopy out in the front. And they wanted not to do it. They wanted to amend the PD and come back to the planning commission to not do it. And so they thought about starting the process to do it, but they ultimately decided not to and build that according to plans. So even though the plans are several years old, they are going with the construction of that awning.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to get a feel for, you know, us, you know, in terms of where we're needed.
I'm going to have to go soon. I'm a bit jet lagged and I want to be safe driving home. But in my mind, this is similar to when we kind of said, do we need to always approve the fireworks? And I think that whenever we can streamline for the people that come before the planning staff and keep it from things that we would automatically kind of say, okay, then I think it's a good thing. I think it makes it us an easier community to work with.
No, I totally agree with the
And so
concept.
I think a lot of these ideas are good and I think could be helpful. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to stay for other stuff, but I do not function well when I'm too tired.
I want you to be safe.
It's God knows what time. I don't know what.
So, okay, go ahead.
It's way
Part
late.
of this
It's
discussion
3 a.m.
is
or
to hone in on the items that you, as the commission, feel comfortable allowing staff to review administratively. Now, making sure it aligns with RRC best practices, the overall goal here. So where we can tweak, where we can modify to make sure that the commission is comfortable with what they are allowing staff to then approve is what this discussion is going to be a part of. We're not trying to take everything away. We just want to make sure that the things that can be streamlined to the comfort, yeah.
Okay, understood.
Mr. Chairman, I'm all for simplifying the process. I mean, having been on the other, podium for many projects, I know I got frustrated from some of the minutia that we had to come to before a planning commission or a zoning board of appeals or a township board. The only thing on your list, I understand everything on your list. The only thing I would be very careful, though, is touching anything with Cherry Hill Village. As I think everyone knows, that's kind of a hot button thing in the township as far as people have ideas of how it's supposed to be and what they want to see it and how they want to see it and all that. And I would just be careful of taking anything out of that part of the township that doesn't get the full review. Again, I'm all for simplifying it, but I just think and I'll use the term PC thing to do is not get too crazy about what you do at Cherry Hill Village as far as not having the planning commission review or whatever of that nature.
And as I mentioned, anything that goes on in Cherry Hill Village requires a PDD, right? So the Planning Commission, the Township Board will see those both at preliminary and final. So there will be ample opportunity to see that in depth. The only change is that they won't then have to come back with a site plan. The staff would make sure that their site plan complies with the PDD agreement and everything that has already been done. So if they want to change something when they go through the site plan approval process, if it's administrative, if there's something that deviates from the PDD, well, then they have to come back, right? That's not something that we can just willy-nilly agree to. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I just think there's certain things there's a certain sensitivity about, and that's.
And there are ways that we can build in other things, certain areas within Cherry Hill Village or certain thresholds within Cherry Hill Village that don't have to come, that can be administrative only. And we can discuss those when we have some draft language.
Let me ask this, and then maybe this is overstepping our bounds here. So when you get into a situation where you feel that administratively you can handle this, would it be a no-no to just pass that along to us and say, we're about to approve this? What do you think? Is that something that you could see us happening routinely, or do you feel that that's just an unnecessary step? We don't have to weigh in, but maybe there are some thoughts that could come from the commission that might help you in that decision. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's difficult because at that point, we are then eliciting comments from you as residents, right? I mean, it can get a little.
You're just passing
it can get a
along
little
information.
mucky. But you do receive the monthly report, and you would then see things that were being reviewed administratively through our office. So there would be ways for you to see the things.
But we don't
that
see
were coming
what is
through.
being reviewed. We see, we don't see the detail.
I understand that.
Yeah.
If I could just weigh in on it, some of this stuff too. I think your suggestion might be problematic because if it's in the zoning ordinance and the process is laid out in the zoning ordinance for just an administrative review, and then staff is saying, well, the ordinance permits us to do this, there's nothing discretionary about it, but we still want planning commission's input, then your applicant might have a problem with that because it's beyond the process that's set forth in the zoning ordinance. So once you delegate it to staff, then it's staff's decision at that point. And I think what they're asking, or what they're recommending anyway, is those decisions that are non-discretionary. And when you take a look at the zoning ordinance, or the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, if a site plan comes before the township and it is compliant in every aspect of the zoning ordinance, it includes all the information that is required under the zoning ordinance, it shall be approved. So there is no discretion anyway. Like even if it did come before you, you wouldn't have the discretion to deny it because the Zoning Enabling Act doesn't permit that. So if it is truly a non-discretionary decision, it probably does belong with staff. And I think that's sort of what they're trying to streamline. And so it isn't a bunch of stuff that comes before you that is completely compliant, and you don't have a choice anyway, honestly,
that.
because it's compliant.
Yep. Okay. So you don't need anything from us tonight on this, we're just exchanging these ideas, right?
Yeah, it was just, it's to let you know that this is what's coming forth and prepare for discussion next month. But if there's anything that was noted here that you had particular, any thoughts or any objections to, then we can make sure that we focus our discussion on that in a little bit more in depth next month.
Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay.
I have a question. Are we looking into other cities, I mean, how they handle their business on these guidelines, or this is something we are developing on our own?
Well, I mean, every community is a little bit different in terms of what they feel comfortable going through planning commission, what they feel staff can handle, et cetera. And it's up to you as the planning commission, the board, staff to work out that language. A lot of other communities have received RRC certification, so they have streamlined their processes to allow just exclusive planning commission approval for site plans, administrative staff review and approvals for things that are non-discretionary, things like that. If you would like examples, we can put together some examples for you for next month, if that would be helpful.
That would definitely help to know what other communities are doing. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anybody? Okay, so let's move along. The next item is to discuss amendments to the fence and wall standards. Now, we're going to deal with this next month, right?
Correct.
So there's really not a lot to discuss on that tonight. I think we all read that, and we all get the gist of what's happening. They're getting a lot of petitions at the Zoning Board of Appeals for front yard fences, for one thing. I mean, if you want, Aaron, or Patrick, if you want to weigh in real briefly on that, what's going on?
Sure. The Zoning Board of Appeals, they have a recurring number of variance requests for fences in a front yard, specifically corner lot fences. Corner lots, by definition, have two front yards, and both sides of the corner that abut a road are defined as front yards. And the zoning ordinance, or rather the fence ordinance, doesn't allow fences in a front yard setback. So some corners, certain types of fences seem pretty innocuous. Other types of corners, it becomes a really ugly fence that's out of character of the area. The Zoning Board of Appeals has gotten a number of requests over the last several months for corner lot fences. It's a majority of their variance cases are corner lot fences. It far exceeds anything else that they get variance requests for. So what the ZBA has asked the Planning Commission to do is to review the fence ordinance specifically for corner lot fences and address the standards. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Planning Commission and the board will have to amend the ordinance. It may choose not to amend the ordinance. It may like the ordinance that's there, but we'll go through the process of looking at some of the variance requests that the Zoning Board of Appeals gets for corner lot fences, some of the variances that have been approved, some of the variances that have been not denied, and some of the, I guess, visual preference issues that we look at in corner lot fences in terms of the areas where it may seem excessive, areas where they may seem reasonable, and how we could write that into a code if we find that some corner lot fences are reasonable in front yard setbacks. So it's a very complicated issue. It's probably going to take several months to go through. There's opinions all over the board on corner lot fences. So we'll come back next month, maybe with some ordinance language for the fence ordinance, maybe some of the boilerplate, the non-controversial language, but with regard to corner lot fences, we'll bring forward some options, some graphics, some photos, and be able to talk about it in more detail in the coming months.
All right. Master plan. What do we know about master plan buildup?
Yeah, thank you. So we're continuing to plug away. In the memo that was shared in your packet, just a general update, we're still moving forward and doing some more specific community engagement events. One of the big ones is scheduling some stakeholder discussions of specific groups in the community. Those meetings have not yet been set, but they're moving forward. We are finalizing the community survey. That is almost done. So as soon as that's ready, it will go and be reviewed by the advisory board before it's launched. So we think probably launching in, hopefully sometime in November. And then probably be open until probably sometime in January. So give people plenty of time to submit their responses. As for the advisory boards, the meeting dates have finally been set, so we'll be meeting the second Thursday of the month, beginning in November. In October, on the 20th, we'll be having kind of a meet and greet with all the members to make sure that they understand role and responsibility of the advisory board, planning commission, township board, timeline, process, and we can answer any questions that they do have. So we'll be kicking everything off officially in November. And then as part of this update, I include some information on redevelopment-ready communities. We've already kind of discussed it with the site plan review, but the Zoning Board of Appeals bylaws have been drafted. They've been reviewed by legal counsel, and they will be on the agenda for the October 13th meeting. So once the Zoning Board of Appeals has adopted their bylaws, that'll be a big check mark off for RRC certification. As well as the site plan review process, as we mentioned. So once we get that going, that'll be another big check off for us through that process. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I don't have anything, I like where we're going with that. I hope we're all going to be able to be involved with this new board and, you know, exchange some ideas, and Canton will be the better for it. I also think Canton is going to be very fortunate in that it'll develop perhaps some prospects for either a board like this one, you know, or one of the other boards in the township in the future by getting people involved. So I'm always good on volunteerism, you know, spawning further involvement in the community. That's pretty much all that I have. Anybody else have anything?
I'll just note that Dr. Bernstein was one of my professors at Eastern.
We didn't do public comment. I have a public comment.
You have a public comment? Okay.
I don't know if anyone, Patrick, I'm sure you and Aaron have seen it, but I don't know if anyone has had the opportunity to see the new gas station at Haggerty and Ford Road. It looks 1,000% better at that corner than it did with the previous gas station, so.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree, so.
Yeah, the best part of it, I think, personally, is that it's got a cross-connection to the drive to the north, so people can use that drive to access.
I like that one of the driveways on Haggerty Road has been eliminated, so.
So that's a very progressive.
Thank you for your comment,
thing.
Mr.
Yes.
Member of the public.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Shut up.